Hello everyone. Hoot hoot everyone. Do I say hoot hoot on the Tabletop Tall Tales videos? I probably should have checked before I started, but here we are. Hi everyone. I'm doing another Tabletop Tall Tales video. I know it's been a while. It's been quite a while, and I know that people have asked me about when the next time I was going to do a Tabletop Tall Tales video would be, and I've just kind of not gotten around to it for what is probably a ludicrously long time. But that is effectively because I haven't really had the energy or really had much of a topic that I really wanted to discuss, which is why I'm kind of surprised that today, as I was taking a bath, which is why I look like a drowned rat, I realised that I actually had two topics I want to discuss. Not going to do them both in one video. I'm going to go with the easier one first, and then if I've got any energy after I've done the first one, I'll do a second one. Basically, if you don't see a second video not too long after this one comes out, you know I ran out of energy, and then by the time I had energy again, I'd forgotten what I was supposed to be talking about, so well, such is life. Also, Tim is loudly drinking water because he just, it's like he waits. It's like he waits for me to be talking, and then he decides to be as loud as physically possible. You know what? I'm just going to power through it. I don't care. So, today, as the name of the video suggests, and as you might expect, given the fact that most of the videos on here are related to Vampire the Masquerade, we're going to be once again talking about Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the fact that I have had an increasingly peculiar relationship with Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. I don't know what I'm going to call the video, so this may be obvious on the way in, but what I'm going to tell you right now, and I am just now realising that I probably should have opened this Word document later, like already, before I started, but I am nothing if not inefficient. I'm trying to remember what it's called. There we go, it's just the name of my campaign. Basically, one thing I've realised now that I've run Vampire the Masquerade, because, by the way, that's actually a thing. Even though a lot of these videos have been, like, my opinion on how you should run Vampire the Masquerade, and I've been talking relatively, I think, seemingly authoritatively, as if I know what I'm talking about. Until not that long ago, I had never actually run a game of Vampire the Masquerade, be it 20th Anniversary Edition or any other version of the game. The only game I'd ever run had been a couple of very, very short, I'm talking like 5-session D&D games in like 3rd edition and then like 1 in 5th edition. It was only with the Skelwich Colony campaign I ran a while ago, about a year ago, that I actually, at least I think it was a year ago, I'm not good with time, but it was only then that I actually ran Vampire the Masquerade for the first time. But I've come to realise something about Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition, and that is that Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition is quite possibly my favourite tabletop system. That's not news. You know, the fact that I know so much about the lore, the fact that I stick so aggressively to V20 as the thing I talk about, even though V20 is increasingly irrelevant, as V5 and the updated lore continues to kind of march forwards, that should make it quite clear that I'm a big fan of V20. But, so that's not news. The news is that I've also discovered that despite the fact that I love the world of Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition, and I love the system, and I really enjoy running it, as do the people in my campaign, Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition is also one of the most irritating systems I've ever had to deal with. It is very annoying, it is inconsistent, and it is difficult to understand. Despite the fact that, at its core, if you were to look at the rules, if you were to watch an individual game, you can probably get the gist of how the game's played fairly easily. But despite that, through some kind of dark wizardry, Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition manages to be one of the most unexpectedly difficult to manage and convoluted systems I've ever seen. It's certainly the most convoluted one I've ever run, and based on, you know, conversation, and based on, like, other games that I've played, now that I see a more full version of the rules than I've played previously, I increasingly realise that it's weird. It's a weird system, man. It's an odd system. But rather than talking about this at length, without explaining it, I think I should explain why. And the easiest way to do that, I think, is to first explain essentially what the bare bones of the system is, like what the moment-to-moment gameplay of Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition is, and then explain how that somehow becomes breathlessly convoluted and difficult to understand when it comes to actually trying to play the game. Because even though I've talked a lot about Vampire the Masquerade, I realised I don't think I've ever really discussed any of the mechanics in much detail. Because, to be fair, most of my videos are either broad stories, or they're me discussing points of lore, or very broad opinions, rather than me getting into the basics of the mechanics. So, effectively, playing Vampire the Masquerade is, all things considered, fairly simple. It's a game that runs entirely off of one type of die, if you weren't aware, and that type of die is the D10. It's why I literally keep a dice cup full of nothing but D10s on my desk. It's all of my nice D10s. And a coin, for flipping a coin. Because everything in Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition comes down to the roll of a number of D10s. Fighting, D10s. Talking, D10s. Thinking, D10s. Feeding, D10s. Everything is D10s. Regardless of what it is you're attempting to do, regardless of what it is that's happening, effectively every interaction in Vampire the Masquerade will result in the storyteller telling you to roll X number of D10s. Typically, that number of D10s is based on... Bugger off, then. You asked me to throw it for you. Well, you didn't ask. He doesn't speak. I know that. I'm not mad. But you asked me to throw it for you, and then when I throw it for you, you just look at me like I just shat on your mum. What the... Essentially, every single roll in Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition comes down to the storyteller telling you to roll a certain number of D10s, and then, depending on how many successes you get on the roll, will depend on how well it goes. Typically, it'll be, I always get the names of this wrong, but it'll be I believe it's an attribute and an ability. So like so say strength or intelligence, combined with, say, animal ken or athletics. And then the number you have on your character sheet in those abilities and attributes, typically 1 to 5 in most games of Vampire. You can get more than that, but typically it'll be somewhere between 1 and 5. Will make up your dice pool, and the amount of dice in both of those sections that you are asked to roll, that makes your overall dice pool. You roll, the storyteller sets what the difficulty is, essentially what the dice have to beat, like what they have to match, what number they have to match in order to succeed. Typically higher is worse. Well, I mean, typically the higher the difficulty is, the less likely you are to get it, because it's meet this number or higher to succeed. And then, depending on how many successes you get, depends on the degrees of success. For the most part, that's fine. Essentially, especially when you consider the fact that Vampire the Masquerade is, compared to a lot of other tabletop RPGs, especially, say, D&D and Pathfinder, you know, you're very kind of combat-heavy, typical kind of adventuring party style of tabletop RPGs. Vampire is not particularly combat heavy. It can be, but generally it isn't. So you spend most of your time just kind of talking to other members of the party, talking to the NPCs. Occasionally you ask, can I do this, or I want to do this. Then the storyteller tells you what number you have to beat and what you have to roll to beat it. You roll, the storyteller tells you how it goes, you move on. Doesn't seem particularly difficult. And to be fair, for the most part, it's not. It's even so open as to, while there are a bunch of specific, like, I believe they're called maneuvers in the book, which are like, if you want to do X, this is how you do it. It would be this combination of attribute and ability. The book also is very explicit that you don't actually have to follow that, and ultimately it's just whatever the storyteller at the time thinks is most appropriate, and there will be other ways to succeed at whatever you're trying to do, separate from what the book might necessarily imply. The book might say in order to open a lock, you have to roll, say, Dex Larceny to lockpick. But simultaneously, even if there's not necessarily, there may be a maneuver for it in the book, but even if there isn't a maneuver for this in the book, if you were to ask me if you could knock the door down, you know, strength athletics, you can knock the door down. Based on that, you know. Relatively simple system. This only becomes convoluted when you then deal with the fact that when combat does happen, the game gets very strange, and the game has a lot of strange edge cases. And the game doesn't do a good job of explaining them. Typically, that's all fine and good. Relatively simple, doesn't seem too hard. The problem is that there are a lot of weird edge cases. Vampires have disciplines, which have odd interactions with things, and are often written in such a way as to not make it particularly clear how they work, or they are written in a way that's very clear, but the implications of them can be wild, like absolutely ludicrous, if you think about it for a second. Or you run into, say, issues in regards to how health works, and difficulties in trying to determine basically what hurts people and what doesn't, or what injuries do in specific circumstances. You have issues of the humanity system, which is in often cases a bit vague at best. You have the fact that quite frequently the descriptions of things in the book will run directly counter to essentially mechanically what's described, or they'll just be like gross exaggerations of what's described. And there's also many situations where, quite frankly, there are just big glaring holes in the rules that the game just doesn't really seem to adjudicate on. Or if it does adjudicate on them, it adjudicates on them in very strange places. Effectively, the reason that Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition has one overarching problem, and that is that it is a remarkably... It's not a problem with the system itself. It's a problem specifically with the core rules. And that problem is that this rulebook was designed by fucking lunatics. And I don't understand why this rulebook behaves the way it does. I have a document, a Google Doc, that my party, for my Vampire the Masquerade campaign, which I'm starting up again in the near future, I'm working on it right now. It just takes forever, because building an entire city takes forever. And for some reason I decided that I was going to build an entire city and not just use one of the pre-made, like, LA by Night or New York by Night setting books. No, none of that for Ethan. Ethan has to make all of his NPCs and their entire factions and motivations, and introduce characters from a bunch of different parts of World of Darkness, and constantly get distracted adding new things that don't need to be there. I've made an entire faction that's not supposed to show up until halfway into the campaign. I haven't finished dealing with, like, the Ventru, and I added a new weird faction that's not going to show up until... I have problems focusing on what I'm supposed to be working with, and it's not going well. Anyway, I have a Word document. A Google document, rather. That is just full of house rules. Because... partially to deal with just changes to the game. Standard homebrew stuff, where there's just little things about Vampire the Masquerade that I don't particularly like, or that I would prefer to work another way. But there's also a lot of things in my homebrew document, and a lot of other documents. We now have, I think, 3 different documents, which is just desperately trying to compile the rules in a way that is reasonable to understand. Because if you want to find out how Frenzy works in Vampire the Masquerade, you have to look in, I think it's 3 separate, unrelated sections of of the actual core rules. You have to look at the frenzy section, but then you have to look at like another section much later on in the book. I think it might just be in the humanity section, where there's a box out discussing something, and then much earlier on in the book, there are times when this book references things that it never actually establishes. We ran into this with the Giovanni. Nowhere, as far as I can find in this book, to the point at which, and this was odd, we found page references, like quotes, that claim to be from this book addressing things that are not in this book. And I don't know what the hell is going on, but it's just not in here. But when I was introducing a new member of the party to the game, helping him with his character, he's playing a Giovanni, we ran into a very peculiar thing about the Giovanni. And that thing would have been helpful if I'd had little notes in my book so I could find my pages more easily. Okay, Gangrel, Giovanni. Okay. The clan weakness of the Giovanni. The kiss of a Giovanni vampire causes excruciating pain in mortal vessels who receive it. If the Giovanni isn't careful, her vessel may die of shock and agony before being wholly exsanguinated. When a Giovanni feeds upon a mortal, she does twice as much damage as the kiss of another vampire would inflict. Nowhere outside of this specific section does it ever say that the kiss does damage. In fact, later on in the combat maneuvers section of the book, the only part of the book that actually describes the mechanics of a Knight's, of a kindred's kiss, in the only other place it addresses kisses mechanically, it explicitly states they do no damage. Because there is a difference mechanically between a kiss and a bite. A bite deals aggravated damage. A kiss, explicitly according to the combat section of this book, does no damage. And yet, according to the Giovanni clan weakness, the Giovanni kiss attack deals double damage. What makes it worse is that the clan weakness also specifies that the Giovanni clan weakness causes them to deal 2 points of damage. For example, it says here, if a Giovanni takes 1 point of blood from a mortal vessel, that victim would suffer 2 health levels of damage. That is the only place where the book ever implies, ever explicitly states, that feeding actually does health damage. The book does mention, in different areas, that health and blood have some kind of relation to each other in mortals, in living creatures. But weirdly, it only ever, as far as I could tell, as far as any of us could find in the book, when checking it ourselves, like my entire party were looking into this at one stage, the only place it ever mentions it, outside of the Giovanni clan weakness, is saying that an already injured human has less health, or has less blood pool. That it says that, like, if, say, I think it's like every point of health damage they've taken, like, reduces the amount of blood pool a vampire can extract from a human by 1. But it never comments on the other way around. And this kind of issue is endemic throughout the entire book. Endemic, that's definitely the wrong word. Is, like, consistent throughout the entire book. There are just a ludicrous amount of times when the book will make reference to rules, but won't tell you where the rule is, and oftentimes won't actually, and not as often, but frequently, doesn't actually seem to have the rule it's referencing in the book itself. And I don't fully understand why. Beyond that, It also has some issues of... The system has some issues of rules, to my mind, wildly misrepresenting the law. Which is why there are a number of house rules that I have here that are effectively just trying to replicate or trying to even out the rules, the uncertainty there. Other thing, actually, as far as I can tell, I don't think it also... So I'm looking at my own house rules now, and I'm realizing that there's a lot... There's a lot of weird shit in this book. Like, you can be set on fire, but I don't think, as far as I can tell, the book never says when in initiative the fire damage occurs, which is kind of important. Because if you're not aware, Vampire the Masquerade combat is really weird. I've never seen a system that does this, except the closest I can think of is Shadowrun, and that's only because it's got, like, the version of Shadowrun I played had a similar thing where if you had wired reflexes, you could get essentially extra turns at the end of initiative. But V20, I don't even know how V5 does this, but V20 has this very odd initiative system, which I suppose is more realistic, but is a nightmare to keep track of. Which is that effectively each turn has 2 phases. Each round has 2 phases. The intention phase and the action phase. Which, oddly, means that the person with the best initiative declares their action last. Because as opposed to something like D&D, where you would, you know, if you've got a good initiative, you act first, and then you're able to do damage. You do what you just do what you want to do, and then your turn's over, and then you move on to the next guy. In Vampire, all of you declare what you're going to do, or what you want to do, in kind of reverse initiative order, so the slowest person declares what they want to do first. And then these actions resolve in initiative order. So the person who has the highest initiative declares what they're going to do last, but actually acts first. The logic being that if you are that effectively, if you have the best initiative, you are able to react to what you see everyone else planning on doing. So theoretically, someone with a higher initiative than you knows what you're going to do before you do it, and as such can move to block you from doing it. It's a reasonable system in concept, and if you're trying to replicate reality. It makes combat take quite a while, frequently causes, especially in like bigger combats, it frequently causes problems where, frankly, both me and the players will sometimes just forget what we were doing. To the point at which I think I might actually insist that we start writing it down when we get back to the main campaign. Because that's a problem. When I've done it recently. I did a very brief kind of mini adventure. It was supposed to be 1 session, ended up being 3, to introduce the new player to my Scale Witch campaign to the game, and to basically just remind us all, mechanically, of how Vampire the Masquerade behaves in combat, because we've all been playing just Pathfinder 2nd Edition a lot. Recently, like, exclusively, like, 2 sessions a week of Pathfinder 2nd Edition for, like, the last, like, 6 months. And, yeah, me and the other players, we just frequently forgot what we were doing when the time came to act, and we just had to hope we remembered it correctly. It can be a bit confusing. It can be a bit convoluted, and a bit difficult. That's not even like the system being bad. That's just the system being weird. I got distracted. I'm realizing this is just going to be like a broad series of observations and complaints about peculiarities in the rules. In fact, yeah, I'm just going to embrace that now. I've got 2 last things. These are rambling for a reason. So the last 2 things. and I'm going to just kind of speed through these now. The last two things is, number one, the rules for Diablerie are awful in V20. I hadn't realised when I was a player in V20 last, quite some years ago, back when I was in university, I hadn't realised just how kind of, like, bodged and kind of rowdy and homebrewed to fuck the version of Vampire we were playing was. But it was a pretty fucking rowdy-ass, like, homebrew of Vampire. Because Diablerie in our version actually has some danger. Whereas in V20 Standard, the actual act of Diablerie itself doesn't really have any risk associated with it. It has one... Like, if you can disable a vampire adequately to be in a position where you can Diablerize them, beyond that, there is, like, a single roll, which I don't quite understand the point of. It's like I think it's like a DC 9 or 10 strength roll? Well, hang on, I've got it. Yeah, difficulty 9 strength check. Yeah, I've got it written down. To, like, physically suck the last, like, yeah, the soul out of the veins once all the blood's gone. I don't know why there's a need to make that roll. And there's also no consequence for failing it, as far as I could tell. So you can just keep trying over and over again until you get it. I don't even know how you'd botch it. The only way I could think of botching it would be if you botch it, I don't know, I guess, aggravated damage, tear the throat out of the vampire you're trying to eat and just end up, like, final deathing them, I guess? But there's not really any consequence for the guy doing it. And then once you've done that, you don't even get the vampire's generation. I think you just go down a generation, regardless of who it was you ate. That sucks. Like, that's both, like, really safe and pretty feeble in terms of risk-reward. I guess I'm just going to be, in the title, I'm just going to be mentioning that this is also going to be me talking about my own custom, different section of the video, Ethan's own version of the Diablerie rules. I came up with different Diablerie rules, so I'm going to tell you what my different Diablerie rules are. And I called them in my house rules document just over here. I called them rules regarding the big suck. Because I am a child. But effectively, what I've done is I've gone out of my way to increase the risk, like, of Diablerie, in terms of, like, how it fucks with the Diablerist, as well as drastically increasing the benefits. So you will run the risk of damaging yourself, while also gaining a lot more. It's a much higher risk-reward. Yeah. So, I'm just going to read my ruling here. You do your standard difficulty 9 strength check to perform the physical act of Diablerie. But once that's done, an opposed roll occurs. An opposed roll being both sides roll the same thing with the same difficulty. And whoever gets the most successes wins. An opposed roll occurs. It's the current willpower of the Diablerist, so the player's committing Diablerie, versus the maximum willpower of the victim, plus the difference in generation, assuming that the victim is a lower generation. My system technically gives a reason. There's no reason in standard Diablerie rules why you would ever Diablerize someone of a higher generation, of a weaker generation, but there is actually theoretically reasons you might do that in my rules, so I felt the need to mention that. But assuming the victim is a lower generation, regardless of the outcome, the victim will die. If the Diablerist botches the roll, they get possessed by the victim and become an NPC. So, the act of Diablerie, in my Vampire the Masquerade games now, always carries with it the chance of immediate character death. Good. I want to kill more characters. This is effectively a character death. If they severely fail, but don't botch, they can suffer permanent derangements, and possibly nature/demeanor changes that are permanent, as their soul gets mixed into a gestalt with their victim's soul. Lesser failures, or even successes, result in less extreme drawbacks, such as temporary derangements or temporary demeanor changes. At the highest levels of success, the impact is purely represented in roleplay. You cannot use willpower points on the roll. You can't willpower your way through not getting your soul eaten. You automatically lose a level of humanity upon completing a Diablerie. I believe that I'm not even sure if you I know that you run the risk, at least, of losing a humanity point by committing Diablerie. You might also, in Standard, just automatically lose one. In the lore, from what I remember, it seems like that's pretty much definite, because you're actively corrupting your soul by doing it. You will also lose a level in your Path of Enlightenment, if appropriate. Something like, one of the evil paths that explicitly encourages Diablerie, you won't lose. But if you're on, like, the path of... Is the Path of the Honourable Accord? Or, like, one of the religion-based paths? Obviously, that'll change. I'm running into an issue because one of my players is actually on the path... is going to be playing a character on the Path of Metamorphosis. And I don't know. that's something that I just don't know about that. The Path of Metamorphosis, if you're not aware, is it's essentially the Shamise flesh crafting path, where it's all about transformation and turning yourself into a monster, effectively, and kind of transcending your limits. And it's really weird and alien, and I don't really know how Diablerie would interact with that path. It's weird. Upon succeeding a Diablerie roll, you will gain half the generation difference rounded up to your generation. So, if the target was 1 or 2 generations lower than you, you will gain 1 generation. 3 or 4 generations lower, you will gain 2, etc., etc. Similarly, you will gain a discipline point per generation absorbed, minimum of 1, even if your generation does not change. So, 1 point when your generation lowers by 1, 2 when your generation lowers by 2, etc., etc. These points can be spent on any discipline the victim had, up to their number of dots in said discipline, though this does exclude sorcery/trained disciplines, such as thaumaturgy and necromancy. Stuff that you basically have to be, like, taught ritual and stuff in order to use. You can't just automatically have that. But that's, I think, basically also the same if you just drank the blood of someone and you try and buy their discipline with XP. Stuff like, say, celerity, you could just manifest if you've got, like, blood with celerity in you, but stuff like thaumaturgy or even dementation, you have to be trained. Depending on the situation, you may also gain some abilities from Diablerie at my discretion. This will generally exclude knowledges. There can at times be a reward to failing a Diablerie roll. If there is one, or if there is more of the victim's mind and soul left in your body after the Diablerie is completed, you may be offered knowledges and the opportunity to spend your discipline points on otherwise inaccessible disciplines. Effectively, if you are turned into a gestalt and the guy you ate was a Tremere, you may suddenly find yourself able to use thaumaturgy, when you wouldn't have been able to if you hadn't fucked up the roll. Just as kind of a little mollifying thing, in case you fuck up. Or you might just learn things, because you just have that guy's memories in you now as well. After committing Diablerie, you will be able to purchase dots of the victim's clan disciplines for the rest of your character's life at the out-of-clan discipline XP cost. If your current willpower is higher than the victim's total willpower, you are immune to the effects of a botch. So, yeah, you can't, basically if the guy is massively weaker than you, he can't possess you. Upon completion of the willpower roll, assuming you didn't botch and become possessed, you're required to make a self-control/instinct roll, difficulty of 10, minus your humanity/path rating, to retain control and avoid addiction to the experience of Diablerie. It's a bit more elaborate, and a bit more accurate to at least how I remember it being described in the lore than the very simplified version we get in V20. I believe in the book, The Guide to the Tal May Ra, there is a somewhat more elaborate version of the Diablerie rules, at least more elaborate than what's in the core book, but I prefer mine. I prefer mine. And I got to test it out at one stage, because even in the brief kind of one-off adventure with pre-made characters that I made, where we were just playing Sabat, raiding an Anarch house, an Anarch-like stronghold, one of the players successfully ate a guy. Yeah. Generation didn't change. Actually, no, did his generation? No, yeah, his generation did change. Yeah, his generation did go down by 1. Gain celerity. Unfortunately, he was a Tremere. Didn't help him much. Don't know why he picked celerity, to be honest with you. Just seems like a bad choice. Seems like a very bad choice. And, I don't have anything else to say except for one more thing, which is just, I've got another thing to add onto the list of weird problems with Vampire, like weirdly specific problems. It's too small to put in a separate video, but this seems to just kind of be a random assortment of my opinions on rule-related stuff in V20, now that I've actually like run a campaign of it. And that is that, I believe it's the Path of Conjuring, is really weird. Specifically, in that the Path of Conjuring, I'm going to double-check the precise wording here, but the Path of Conjuring is theoretically, because of how open it is, the most powerful thaumaturgy path, possibly the most powerful discipline in the game. Because, yes, here it is, Path of Conjuring. Invoking objects out of thin air. Objects summoned, the uniform, the generic, the limit and the size, nothing larger than thaumaturge. Yeah, basically, as far as I can understand it, because the more powerful you are in... Yeah, here it is. When you get to level 3 of the Path of Conjuring, the Kindred may now conjure complex objects of multiple components and moving parts. For example, the Thaumaturge can create guns, bicycles, chainsaws, or cell phones. And the only limit... It never states, as far as I could find, where the item is conjured. It doesn't say... I don't think it says that it has to be in their hands. I think it just has to be, like, in their line of sight. Yeah. It doesn't specify. Which means that depending on how you interpret the Path of Conjuring, 3 dots, you could make a nuke. At will. And it'll work. Anywhere you can see. You can just make a bomb. You can just spawn a bomb on top of anyone at any time. It's fucked up. I don't like the Path of Conjuring. I'm glad I don't have a Tremere in the party for the next game. But if I find out that any of my players are planning on making a Tremere, and they tell me they're considering the Path of Conjuring, I think I'm going to have to add some rules to the Path of Conjuring. Because the Path of Conjuring is, it's OP. It's OP as fuck. Also, I didn't actually finish my thought earlier. The Path of Fire, where you can just summon flames, it doesn't specify when a vampire is on fire, as far as I can tell. It never specifies when that damage ticks over. It's like once a round, but it doesn't say when. I think I've just kind of house ruled it. It's just another one of these cases of just, like, things that are, like, minor but pretty fucking important. Especially when you get into a combat and then you realize, ah, fuck, the game doesn't tell me when this happens. Oh, wait, I've already added a house rule to my game for the Path of Conjuring. I'd forgotten about it. That they have to be in physical contact with the Conjurer. So the Conjurer can't just make a bomb on top of a guy 500 feet away. Oh, dear. But yeah, fire. Fire's weird. Yeah, fire damage procs on the source's turn is what I did. So basically, whatever caused the fire when it's their turn, like if someone is lit on fire by a weapon or magic effect caused by another character, the fire damage procs on the like the caster's turn effectively. But if it's just environmental, like if someone fell into like a flaming barrel or something, the fire damage would proc on the the turn of the guy who's on fire. That's my house rule. Also, as far as I can tell, and you know, if you're watching this and you're familiar with Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition, and I've gotten any of these wrong, please do feel free to correct me. Because I would like, and ideally point me to where the correction is, like where I've gotten it wrong, in any of the things I've said, because I've looked through the book. We've had like multiple people looking through the book trying to find this shit, and there's a lot of. I'm fully willing to believe that a lot of these gaps I'm seeing in the rules are probably explained in a weird, like it wouldn't surprise me if there is an explanation about the Path of Conjuring, but it's like boxed out in the index next to the Fae. Like it wouldn't surprise me if it was just hidden in a weird part of the book. It's a weird game. Vampire's a weird game. Yeah, it's just a weird game. I like it. It's formatted very badly. Okay. The next video that I had in mind, and I can feel that I don't have the energy for it today, I'm going to try to make some specific notes about it tomorrow when I'm at work, and see if I can keep to that. I want to talk about what things I've learned from running a Vampire, like lessons I've learned, kind of reflect on the Colony campaign, because I never got around to making the video I wanted to make, reflecting on that. Especially since, basically I'm aiming to run my new campaign in October or November, depending on when it gets done. It's mostly done. I just need to basically finish writing up some details about all of the NPCs, finish making the tokens, and then write up some quests, like some introductory quests, and attach, like, for each of the Primogen, just to give the party, you know, something they can do right off the bat to kind of get back into Vampire before I start basically demanding that they make their own decisions. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's probably a bit more rambly than usual, but that's kind of the thing here, and it's been a while. I don't remember if I had this the last time. I probably didn't, but I got another Vampire the Masquerade tattoo. I got the Nosferatu clan symbol. And yes, I know it's the clan symbol from V5. Like, I know it's the V5 clan symbol. But there's a good reason for that. It's because I don't think that looks particularly out of place next to the Malkavian one from V20. And quite frankly, the V5 Nosferatu symbol is a lot better than the V20 Nosferatu symbol, because the V20 Nosferatu symbol looks like it was carved into a wilting banana. I do still at some point intend on getting a Chemise tattoo on me somewhere as well. I don't know where, but somewhere. Because I like the Chemise. Chemise good. Because then I'll have my 3 favourite clans, the Malkavians, the Nosferatu, and the Chemise. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully I'll remember to do the next one soon enough. Bye.